Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Security Chips podcast. If you're new here, this is the Data Security Council of India's very special forum where we talk everything about cybersecurity, data protection, and in today's episode, special emphasis on the multi-stakeholder model for internet governance. And to discuss this with me here today, we have with us Mr. Samiran Gupta, and he is the Vice President of the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, where he serves as the Vice President of the APAC region. And he also oversees stakeholder management. And of course, Samiran, we're so glad to have you here today with us.
Thank you so much, Deepika. It's great to be here and happy to join.
Yes. So coming back to why I really wanted to do this podcast with you, Samiran, it just comes down to my personal experience with internet governance. So, for instance, in the past, when I was a law school student, I had experiences with working with civil society groups in internet governance, and I also had the privilege to work in the industry side of things at top law firms. And really, when it came down to my law school experience, I was thoroughly overwhelmed with the kind of interest that these stakeholders brought in and the kinds of really the opinions where they converged and diverged into it. So overall, it was a very overwhelming experience for me. So, but when I came to DSCI, and in DSCI, we function at the crossroads of a lot of stakeholders, bringing the academia, the industry, and also of course, the regulators together, I think. And of course, with my experience at the INSIC fellowship where we met, I felt like everything really came together for me. And it almost felt like as though it was like a jazz ensemble, a lot of things happening, but making sense towards the end. So that's really my experience albeit a very limited period of my time, but I always wondered, how must it be for someone who probably spent decades of their lives in the internet governance space. So which is why I brought you here today, Samiran, to have this discussion together. And of course, if I have to summarize the over 3 decades of contributions you made to the internet governance system, I'm sure I won't be able to do justice to it. So, Samiran, why don't we start there? What has your experience been like so far with the IG system?
Even before I start, I must, compliment you on your analogy of internet governance and jazz, because, that's a new one, and I'm going to start using that now. But look, let me start from the year 1984. So 1984 was when I was a very young student heading to the United States to get a master's degree in management. And I was told that there are things called computers that, people use over there, and I need to know how to use them. I did 2 things. I actually learned how to type, because one needed to know their way around a keyboard. So I learned how to type, and then I went to Datamatics Corporation, and you had computers the size of the room we are sitting in, where you learned how to program. So I learned, C language at that time, and it would be a little frustrating because you typed code on a screen, but the punch cards only came back the next day, and you realized that if you made a small error, everything was wrong. Okay, but the long story short, I landed up in the United States at the same time as the computers and the internet were, data processing and the internet were kind of getting started. Okay, so that's when I got started in this space. Although I was doing an MBA program, I took a computer science level elective in database management. So that's, again, I got into some more programming, and then in my first job over there, I helped design a local area network. I was the user interface person. There were no CISOs or CTOs in those days. They were just data admin people
Oh, interesting.
And but we built a network running on telephone lines, 11, 12 kbps per second, connecting offices across the country, the United States. And I replicated the same knowledge and experience that I had gained in the US when I came back to India and helped set up a newspaper called The Asian Age. And we published out of New Delhi, but we had editions running out of Mumbai and for some time in Kolkata and London. And again, using the same principle. Now, all of this was happening before the era of browsers. Okay, so then of course everything changed. So all of this gave me a lot of the material I needed to get into the policy side of the conversation when those opportunities arose. So that's how I kind of. I don't think I planned to be in internet governance, but that experience led me to ICANN in 2014. But that's a different story. So.
Right. I mean, while we're still on the topic of your introduction, Samiran, you being your humble self, you also missed out on mentioning that you earned India a Grammy nomination, but that's really a story for another day.
Yes, absolutely.
But coming down to the topic for today, right, the multi-stakeholder model for internet governance and your role with ICANN, something which really stood out for me about ICANN was the fact that even from a board level, they have a bottom-up approach.
Yeah.
So I really love your input on that. Like, how do you approach the multi-stakeholder model in ICANN, and what's your role essentially there?
So you've actually asked 2 or 3 questions, like one question with 2 or 3 sub-questions. So let me first talk about what ICANN does and a little bit about that and how the multi-stakeholder model functions there. And then I'll talk about what I do. So ICANN is the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, was set up in 1998, and essentially is that place where people, we do two or three things which are very vital to the internet, which is basically we make sure that the domain name system, or the DNS, the heart of the internet, continues to work properly. And this is done in collaboration with other partners as well as, stakeholders who participate directly in ICANN's policymaking. And the other thing, another thing that we do is we kind of manage the root zone. It's a database of the top-level domains of the internet. So that's ICANN's core work. And there's a lot of policy development happening in terms of, how the DNS should be working. Okay, it seems very simple, it seems very straightforward, but it really isn't, because technology keeps changing. And we have to keep up with the technology. But at the end of the day, it's still the DNS, or the domain name system, that is expanding. When it was created, I don't think even the founding fathers of the internet may have realized that it would sustain in this manner for over 50 years. So, but that's where we are.
Right. I'm glad you brought up the founding fathers, because, I immediately go back to John Postel or Steve Crocker. Yeah. So I think before we also dive into the nuances of internet governance and the multi-stakeholder model, I think for the benefit of our listeners, Samiran, I think if you may, can you give us a very brief refresher course on the history of multi-stakeholder governance? How did it come up with? Yeah.
So, the early days of the internet was a part of a US government-funded project called ARPANET. It started in 1969, but there was some research happening even before that. And the core research was around how do you send a packet of data from one computer to another, And obviously there was no one protocol that had been agreed on. And that process, creation of protocols took a fair bit of time. It took many years for that to happen. And some of the founding fathers were, there are many, there were founding fathers and mothers. There were many women who were also involved in very critical, work that took place, in the, let us say, from the 1970s into the 1980s. Okay, but the four standout names are Bob Kahn, John Postel, Steve Crocker, and Vint Cerf. Okay, and there are several others. I mean, there are many others one can speak about, but by and large, what we have today is mostly because of these gentlemen and their contributions. And remember, they were very young students working for universities that had the grants to do this program, okay, to develop what we call the internet. So that's where it started from. And, many years later, I think it's in 2009, let me look at my notes here. Yeah, 2009, in April 2009, Dr. Steve Crocker wrote this lovely op-ed piece in New York Times describing how the standards, how the rules of the internet came up. And I would recommend this article to anybody who's getting into internet governance, or even those who don't plan to be in internet governance, because it just tells you here was a new set of technologies with a lot of established people, professors of technology, science, computer science, and also a lot of young students, such as, Dr. Steve Crocker, who were trying to do new things. Okay, and so Dr. Crocker was at that point assigned the task of keeping notes of their scientific discoveries, but he was really concerned that he's in the company of much learned and much more really respected academicians. How does he make sure that he does not upset somebody else because they've done something in California, but he's not sure whether this professor in New York would approve? So he created this process called the Request for Comments, or RFC. And in fact, RFC 001, if you look at the Internet Engineering Task Force, is credited to Dr. Steve Crocker. So it was a process where he asked for comments from other people. Okay, so that is the basis of the multi-stakeholder model, where you make sure that all stakeholders are engaged in designing a set of protocol, establishing standards, as the case was in that particular instance, and of course kind of propagating governance. Okay, so that's the basis, the origin of the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance.
Yeah, thanks for that, Samiran. Of course, Steve Crocker and his contributions to the IG system is what perhaps led to the formation of ICANN. And I'd say the equivalent is probably, Vint Cerf and Bob Kahn that you brought up, and they were also considered the founding fathers of the World Wide Web, and they were also instrumental in the formation of bodies such as ISOC, the Internet Society. And I was just wondering how, when there are so many other organizations which are also under the umbrella of the multi-stakeholder model, so there's ICANN, ISOC, and there's also APNIC. I just wanted to know, how do these bodies really function, and what are your relationships with them?
So before I go there, I need to slightly correct your statement that you made. So more than Steve, actually, it was John Postel who was keeping track of the numbers, the IP addresses being issued, like whose work inspired the creation of ICANN, far more than Steve Crocker. But nonetheless, Dr. Crocker has been ICANN chairman for a period of time. He was deeply involved, as was Windsurf. Okay, so going back to your question, how do these organizations work with each other? So everyone has a unique role. Okay, so the IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, has the role of creating standards. ICANN does not create standards. Standards are created at IETF. Okay, and once those standards are created, then it's up to industry to adopt those standards. Okay, but ICANN's role, the point is there is a IETF nominee on the ICANN board. Okay, so that's how we keep. At one level, that's how we keep in touch. But of course, ICANN also presents at IETF events. Both organizations have matured along the way. Similarly, Internet Society was created at that time more for capacity building, both in technology as well as in policy making, and of course has grown in parallel. And all three institutions collaborate with each other. We complement each other. But you did mention one regional internet registry, so that is APNIC. You spoke about. So what happens is every region of the world has a regional organization that is the custodian of IP addresses. So ICANN, creates IP addresses, and they are given in blocks to the regional entities, and they then, the commercial sector or the private sector or governments then take it from them directly. So so they have a role. All the regional internet registries also have a great role in making sure that the DNS, the numbers they've allocated and all of that are working. So it's an inter-networked ecosystem that we all need to work with each other to make, the global internet work.
Definitely, that's a really nice way in which you put it. And of course, so far we've been talking about really the benefits of the multi-stakeholder system, and you couldn't have put it across any better. But Samiran, I really want to take a step back here and play the devil's advocate. So, and in fact, here I want to quote Mr. Chris Despain, who used to be part of the ICANN board, and he said that some internet governance issues might be better handled in a multilateral environment. So when he mentioned this, he was particularly referring to legal frameworks such as cross-border data flows or cybersecurity. So would you say that you'd concur with him, or would you say that the multi-stakeholder model still might apply?
It's the way this works is it's neither one or the other. It's both. There is multilateralism exists, and for a good reason. Nation states need to be able to speak to each other on a platform, and they have multilateral processes in place. The internet governance part, and by the way, the United Nations also recognizes this process that there's a role for governments and other stakeholders in global internet governance, and a lot of this has been borne out by the WSIS Plus, the WSIS process, which is, by the way, is going to go into the WSIS Plus 20 review this coming year. Okay, the 20-year review. And there was something called the Global Digital Compact earlier, which was ratified earlier this year, which also harped on this. So the point being, sometimes there are intergovernmental, treaties that countries need to, enact or sign, which, there's no role for, let's say, an ICANN in that. But the way we always look at it is, as long as the core functions of the internet are not disrupted, that's where we come in. Okay, and that's why uh, even an ICANN or a IETF participates in, let's say, the International Telecom Union or ITU's, policy making or technology standards development processes. And in fact, earlier this year in Delhi, we saw for the first time in the APAC region, the World Telecommunication Standards Assembly or WTSA 24, which was held in Delhi. And, although we are not a nation state, but we participated and contributed to that proceeding. So I think this is not about one system versus the other, but being able to complement, back and forth. So.
That's a really interesting take again, Samiran. But really going into particular aspects of the multi-stakeholder model that I had in mind, I was particularly interested, especially coming from DSCI and the NASSCOM standpoint, we're particularly interested in the cybersecurity aspects. So that brings me to one of the key initiatives of ICANN, which is the Registration Data Request Service, or RDRS, as you put it, which is probably, I'd say, is a game changer for law enforcement and agencies, right? But before we get into the technicalities of that, so could you provide some context to our listeners on what RDRS is? Yeah.
So, but even before I get to RDRS, let me just speak a little bit about how at ICANN we look at DNS abuse. We call it, what you call cybersecurity incidents, we call domain names, system DNS abuse. So we have some active measures in place to mitigate DNS abuse. So through, again, this multi-stakeholder process of policymaking, through our constituencies and our stakeholders, we've identified 5 types of abuse. Okay, so there's botnets, malware, farming, phishing, and spam. And based on how any of this works, all of this has led to the amendment of the registrar accreditation agreement that ICANN has with registrars. Okay, and this happened in April this year, 2024. So, which means that registrars have to actively, participate in the mitigation of DNS abuse. Okay, so this is one part. Now, RDRS is something that it's still a pilot project, but and we're gathering data on how it's going, and again, all the information that we've got is available on our web pages. But RDRS is actually a process where, let's say, a law enforcement agency that is registered on the RDRS database or on the website comes to us and says that, we have this phishing attack that is happening and we need data on these IP addresses. Okay. Now, this information is then shared with, registrars and registry operators, and it is incumbent on them to provide us that information. Well, I shouldn't use the word incumbent upon them. They are expected to provide that information, and we give it back to the law enforcement agency. This, unfortunately, this slightly cumbersome process has come about because of the fact that because of various privacy regulations across the globe, without naming names, has led to the redaction of previously publicly available data. In the let's say till 2012, 13, 14. If you, Deepika, if you bought a domain name space and you registered a website, your details was publicly available.
Right,
Okay,
right.
and especially if it's not on a country code top level domain, like like a generic top level domain, your data would be available. But due to privacy restrictions across the globe, that data is now not available, and therefore it's become challenging for law enforcement agencies, and that's why RDRS was, we are hoping that more and more users come on board and quite frankly help us, improve the system.
Right. But generally, do you have any thoughts on what's generally the uptake like globally?
So, when you say locally, do you mean
Globally.
globally?
Yeah.
Globally, it's data protection agencies are signing up slowly. They are starting to use it. We are getting some feedback from them, and we are getting queries from them. The hit rate in terms of responses coming back is maybe in the 34-35% level, but all that data is available on our website. We have quarterly reports which you can download and take a look at.
Coming to the other part of the multi-stakeholder model that I really wanted to touch base with you on, Samiran, is okay, this is something which might seem very heavy, but nevertheless, I think it'd be an interesting perspective to explore. But experts often observe that reforms are required to make the multi-stakeholder process open, inclusive, transparent, accountable, agile, adaptable, effective, and efficient. And I know there's definitely a lot going on here right now, but can you unpack this for us?
It's simple.
Yeah.
It is actually simple. Any system of governance has challenges, whether it's multi-stakeholder, multilateral. Everybody, there is no perfect model. But I think the real issue over here is it's all about participation. All those challenges that you kind of listed out, that's exactly the reason you need to be in the room. And today, one of the unfortunate benefits that has come out of our post-COVID era is that everybody can join online. So a lot of these conversations are happening in our country, across the world, in the region. You need to know where to join. And that's where perhaps someone such as myself can help. There are conversations that happen on protocols standard setting, and that's not so much ICANN, that's IETF. But then, how should a domain name look and behave? That's a conversation which is happening at ICANN. For example, we've done a lot of work in the South Asia region when I was involved in bringing 64 domain kind of experts. These were linguists, these were IT experts, these were various people who came together to tell us what should be the correct standardization and usage of what we call the Neo-Brahmi scripts. Okay, so Neo-Brahmi scripts are, if you look at a 100 rupee note and you see, everything is written in 9 languages.
Right, right.
Like this is a 10 rupee note or whatever is written in 9. So all those scripts are Neo-Brahmi scripts. Okay, and to bring each and every script into the root zone of the internet, we actually engaged. We couldn't be the experts. We could only say what the technical requirements were, but we needed to hear from the experts, and we were able to bring all the Neo-Brahmi scripts into the root zone. So today, if you'd like, you can actually register a domain name in let's say Hindi, in Bangla, in Kannada, in Oriya, and various other scripts. Okay, so all of this happened because of the multi-stakeholder process. Now, we need to always keep working on improving the system. This system is as good as the next person in the chain, and everybody has to pull their weight.
Yeah.
And you've had a little experience when I think when you attended INSIG, as you said, it's decision making based on consensus. So you may come to the table with 5 things you want. I may come to the table with 5 things I want. We may end up with 3 things that we agree on, and that's the consensus. Right. The question is, did we get the right 3 things? And that's when good policy is made. Mm-hmm. Okay? So that's how the system works. It's not foolproof, but it's one that is open to everybody to participate. So I also wanted to add that, speaking of the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance, if you look at all the conversation that is going on about how will artificial intelligence, AI, and be governed globally, and there are a lot of conversations happening. And quite frankly, I would encourage those in that space to also consider the multi-stakeholder model of internet governance for AI governance. And this is something, in fact, I wrote about in a blog in Economic Times, which got published yesterday. I'll share the link with you, and you will see that the challenges that AI faces today is not that different from the challenges that, let's say, our predecessors faced 50 years ago when they were looking at bringing information technology into homes, into offices, into governments, into schools. There were all kinds of challenges there. It's not, those issues are quite similar, but yes, of course, the technology is different.
It'll definitely be very interesting to see how ICANN will, interact with emerging tech and AI. But that's truly a conversation for another day. But on that note, Samiran, a last question that I had for you in mind for today is for those who are considering a career in stakeholder management, right? Something, a very interesting part about you is that you oversee not just India, but also operations across APAC in terms of stakeholder management. So can you describe what a day in your life would look like?
Our role as part of the global stakeholder management team, engagement team rather, is to really be spending time and engaging with our stakeholders. And our stakeholders could be governments, it could be the technology sector, it could be academics, it could be end users, and there is some structure. There's a lot of structure to this. Of course, there is the ICANN ecosystem of advisory committees and supporting organizations that these stakeholders are part of, but equally, we also are always looking for new entrants to internet governance. And that's where youngsters come in. That's where, college students, we are keen to see new people coming through the system, getting engaged in global internet governance. In terms of what my day looks like, it could be figuring out how to, do a program a certain stakeholder community group has asked us for, or let us say we do work with the community in partnership and actually delivering on those goals. So we are to a large part answerable and respond to the community, and therefore we need to also be answerable in terms of what the outputs were.
Right. A very interesting yet challenging role, Samiran. So can't wait to see what ICANN will be doing next.
Thank you.
So really an internet that's made for us and by us.
By us, yes, absolutely.
And on that note, I think it's a great way to end this episode as well. I think it's given our listeners a a lot of food for thought. And I'm sure that, there's like the multi-stakeholder model, there's not always, consensus on everything. So that's true. That holds true for the models that are in play within the IT system as well. So I think overall, Samiran, right from touching upon the history of the multi-stakeholder model, and then, taking us through the multilateralism and the multi-stakeholderism conflict, and not so much a conflict. In fact, it's been truly enriching, and a lot of different perspectives are brought up in this broadcast. And let me tell you, like, while this is mainly a cybersecurity and a data privacy podcast, I think an IG system is something which we really need to start thinking about, as even in terms of data protection and cybersecurity, like all our communities really come together. And I think there's a lot to learn from, even in terms of ICANN, IETF, and ISOC, and the great work you've been doing. So on that note, Samiran, it's been a pleasure to have you here with us today. And thank you again for everyone for listening to today's episode.
Thank you so much, Deepika, for having me, and look forward to seeing this episode live. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.